Commander, it's alive! The vault! Something in the vault is alive!
Confirm the reading. Confirm the reading. Then get me the fleet.
He woke up to the whisper of unknown voices. Ruins had detected a human heartbeat for the first time. My name is Dale Petrosky, and I want to be very clear about something before I tell you what happened. I was not trying to end an interstellar Cold War.
I was trying to take a nap.
I worked. Technically, I still work there. It's complicated as a contract logistics technician for the Threll Assembly, which is a fancy way of saying I drive a cargo loader and occasionally sign for boxes that weigh more than my apartment. The Threll are these tall, gray-skinned folks with 6 fingers and a deep cultural fear of anything that isn't scheduled. They hired a handful of humans because, and I quote from the recruitment memo, Terran organisms demonstrate unusually low maintenance requirements per unit of output. Translation: we don't complain, we don't unionize fast enough for them to notice, and we'll eat almost anything that doesn't actively eat us back first. The job that day was simple. A survey team had cracked open an old ruin complex on a moon called Verison 9, some pre-Threll structure nobody had bothered with in about 4,000 years, and they needed someone to haul the environmental sensors down into the lower vault before the real scientists showed up to look important next to expensive equipment. That someone was me because I was cheap and because the vault was, according to the survey notes, biologically inert and structurally unstable, which in contractor speak means nobody wanted to go first. I went first. I always go first. It's in my contract, right under hazard pay, which sounds a lot better than it actually is. The vault itself was this huge, echoing stone chamber, carved with symbols nobody could read, freezing cold, and pitch dark except for my headlamp. Structurally unstable turned out to mean one crack in the ceiling that had clearly been there since before recorded Threll history. So, I wasn't too worried. I set up the sensors like I was told, and then I did what any reasonable professional does after 6 hours of hauling equipment through a 50-year-old lift shaft. I sat down against the wall, told myself I was just resting my eyes, and fell asleep. I want to stress that this was, in my defense, an extremely comfortable wall. I don't know how long I was out. Long enough, apparently, for every alarm on that moon to go off. Here is the part one only found out about later because obviously I was unconscious for it, and also because half the Threll involved still won't look me in the eye when they explain it. The sensors I'd installed were designed to detect any sign of active energy or biological process inside a site that had been cataloged, tested, and officially declared dead for 4,000 years. Dead ruins don't have heartbeats. That's sort of the definition of ruins. So when my sensor package picked up a steady, rhythmic biosignal pulsing from somewhere in the lower vault, the survey team's on-site analyst, a nervous young Threll named Renevray, did not think, oh, the contractor probably fell asleep. Nobody thinks that. Why would they? There is no cultural precedent among the Threll for a paid employee simply lying down on the job because their entire species is built around the horror of being late. What Ren thought, and I'm told this is a direct quote from the incident log, was, "Something in the ruins is alive." Word went up the chain fast. Verison 9 had been a research curiosity for decades precisely because nobody could figure out who built it or why it had been sealed. A heartbeat inside a 4,000-year-old sealed vault wasn't a maintenance issue. It was, in the words of the regional science director, a Category 1 xenocontinuity event, which is the kind of phrase that makes an entire moon's rotational shift schedules stop mattering very quickly. By the time I'd been asleep for maybe 90 minutes, they'd evacuated the surface camp. By hour 2, a Threll Assembly cruiser called the Vantros Line had diverted orbit to hang directly over Verison 9 because someone had used the phrase possible dormant intelligence in an internal memo, and once that phrase exists in writing, entire fleets start moving whether anyone wants them to or not. By hour 3, Commander Vashter Cole, A genuinely intimidating individual who has survived 2 border skirmishes and, I'm told, once negotiated a hostage release using only a service knife and a very calm voice, was standing in an observation tent above the vault entrance, staring at a live readout of my heart rate like it was a countdown to the end of the world. It kind of was for him, just not in the direction he thought. The working theory, which spread through the chain of command with the enthusiasm of a rumor at a family reunion, was that the ruins had been built by, or for, some ancient dormant entity, and that entity had just woken up. Nobody knew what it was. Nobody knew if it was hostile. Given that it had apparently slept undisturbed for 4 millennia, and picked this exact moment to stir, right after Threll engineers cracked the seal, the safest assumption, the only assumption really, was that it had noticed them, and it was not happy about the intrusion. Vashtor Cole, to his credit, did not panic. He did the responsible thing, which was to quietly triple security, quietly request reinforcements, and quietly not tell anyone on the surface that a possible ancient horror had just clocked in on their sensor logs. Because morale. Renevray, less experienced and considerably more honest with himself, did panic and spent the next hour drafting 3 different versions of what he later admitted was his resignation letter, just in case there was still a company to resign from. Meanwhile, I was having the best sleep of my professional life. I won that on the record too. 4,000-year-old alien stone, it turns out, holds a really consistent temperature. No drafts. No coworkers talking too loud near the break room. If anything, I owe that vault an apology, because I have never slept that well since, and I've tried recreating it with a space heater and my apartment's fire alarm removed, which, yes, I got in trouble for. The heartbeat, of course, never wavered. It never sped up. It never did anything an ancient awakening horror is supposed to do, which, in hindsight, should have been the first clue, but by that point everyone monitoring the readout had already built an entire crisis around it, and nobody wants to be the one who says, actually, maybe it's just sleeping when 3 fleet officers and a regional director are standing in the room. Somewhere around hour 3.5, apparently, the situation escalated even further, in a way I didn't find out about until months later, from a very tired-looking Threll named Team, who ran the Assembly's Regional Archive Division and had absolutely nothing better to do that afternoon than get pulled into an emergency conference call. According to Team, the readouts from my vault had been quietly forwarded up 2 more tiers of command, because possible dormant intelligence is one of those phrases that, once written down, obligates every subsequent officer to forward it further rather than be the one who ignored it. By that point there were, by Team's count, no fewer than 4 separate departments actively drafting protocol, none of whom were talking to each other, all of whom agreed on exactly one thing. Nobody was going down into that vault to check. Nobody, that is, except the handful of increasingly nervous surface staff standing directly above me, who had strict orders to maintain visual and sensor contact with the vault entrance, but absolutely not to enter it, on the theory that whatever was down there might notice them the moment they got close. Ren told me later that he spent most of that stretch staring at a live feed of a stone doorway, occasionally glancing at my unchanging heart rate, and quietly composing increasingly dramatic mental narration for what he assumed was about to happen. He said the worst part wasn't the fear. It was the waiting. 4,000 years of dormancy, he reasoned, meant whatever this was probably wasn't in a hurry, and if it wasn't in a hurry, neither should he be, which did nothing at all to make the next 2 hours go by any faster. Commander Vashtor Cole, for his part, apparently spent that same stretch reviewing the moon's evacuation logistics twice, just in case, and once asked his tactical officer, entirely seriously, whether their weapon systems had ever been tested against an unknown biological entity of indeterminate age and unknown temperament. The tactical officer reportedly said no, because as far as anyone in the Threll Assembly's recorded history was concerned, that particular scenario had never once come up before. It has since then. I'm told it's now a footnote in at least one training manual, right next to my name. Eventually, and this is the part one actually remember, my headlamp battery died and the sudden dark woke me up. I checked the time, Swore quite a bit because I'd missed my scheduled check-in by almost 4 hours and radioed up to base like nothing had happened, because as far as I was concerned, nothing had. Vault team, this is Petrosky. Sensors are installed and nominal. Sorry for the delay, I dozed off, heading up now. There was a silence on that channel long enough that I actually checked to make sure my radio hadn't died too. Then Ren's voice came back, very quiet, very careful, like he was talking to something that might still decide to eat the moon.
Dale.
Please confirm. You were asleep. Yeah, man, it was freezing. I sat down for a second, and it just happened. Sorry. Another silence. Then I heard what I can only describe as several grown Threll officers simultaneously realizing they had scrambled a cruiser, evacuated a research camp, and drafted contingency protocols for a first contact scenario because a human contractor took an unauthorized nap. I came up out of that vault to find the entire surface team standing in a loose, stunned semicircle, staring at me like I'd walked out of the ruins wearing a crown. Commander Vashtor Cole himself came down from the ship, which I'm told never happens for contractor debriefs, and asked me, with what I now recognize as genuine unease, how I had managed to sleep through 4 hours of unmonitored isolation in a structurally unstable, sub-zero, 4,000-year-old alien tomb without so much as checking my surroundings first. I told him the wall was comfortable. He did not have a follow-up question for that. I think some part of him wanted one, and simply couldn't locate it. What came out in the debrief afterward is that the Threll physiology just doesn't do this. Threll sleep in short, carefully monitored cycles, always with backup awareness systems running, always in temperature-controlled environments, because their biology treats unmonitored unconsciousness as close to fatal risk. The idea of a person willingly lying down in a freezing, unstable, unfamiliar structure and just switching off for 4 hours, with no alarm, no partner, no plan, wasn't laziness to them. It was borderline incomprehensible. Ren actually asked me, dead serious, whether humans have some kind of internal defense mechanism that activates during sleep, because otherwise how had I survived? I told him the internal defense mechanism was called not caring enough to worry about it, and he wrote that down. I saw him write it down. I don't know what department that went to, but I hope they got a good laugh out of it, or possibly a promotion, because from what I hear, my little Tuesday afternoon nap is now cited in an internal Threll training document about unpredictable Terran resilience baselines, filed somewhere between a report on human tolerance for spoiled dairy and one about our apparent inability to be reasonably scared of open water. The official incident report, which I did eventually get to read, described the event as a false positive dormant entity alert resulting from unforeseen Terran behavioral variance, which is a very long, very official way of saying, our guy fell asleep and nearly caused a diplomatic incident with himself. They still call me the sleeping god on that base, which I've decided to just accept, because the alternative was letting them keep calling me Subject Petrosky, like I was in a containment file, and honestly the god thing gets me free coffee from the junior staff, who still aren't sure if I'm joking when I don't correct them. Commander Vashtor Cole pulled me aside before I shipped out, and told me, in that very calm, very controlled voice of his, that if I ever intended to nap somewhere that critical again, I was to at minimum leave a note. I told him I'd think about it.
I have not thought about it.
I have, since then, fallen asleep in a supply closet, a cargo bay during a fuel transfer, and once, memorably, standing up against a wall during a mandatory safety briefing about the dangers of unmonitored unconsciousness, which nobody in that room found nearly as funny as I did. Ren still checks my vitals sometimes when I show up for a shift, quietly, like he's expecting the readout to do something unusual. It never does. It's just me, mildly undercaffeinated, wondering why an entire fleet once treated my lunch break like the opening act of an apocalypse. For the record, the wall really was that comfortable. I'd sleep on it again.